Thanks a lot, Michael. Well, really, for the next 10 minutes or so, I'll try to keep to time, but anybody knows me, I can talk for Ireland. Really, I just want to focus on a couple of core issues around this whole notion of the curse of knowledge, and particularly looking at how we can address this curse of knowledge within training, and particularly within online learning. And I was trying to get a photograph of Gary Burnett in there, so I had to rely just on Einstein there. Really what we find when organisations come to us, they have a particular need, they've got a new policy, they've got a new comm strategy, and they say, okay, training is the answer, training is our saviour of our own universe. So whilst maybe not Flash Gordon there, showing my age there, it's the old Flash Gordon as I remember fondly, really they're starting to think we need training, we need to get everybody trained up, they need to know this policy inside out, there's lots of things that they need to know. There's lots of knowledge that we want to convey. So here's our subject matter expert. Just go and talk to Willie Joe there. He'll tell you everything he knows about the subject. Which really then it starts to become such a challenge, because we find that subject matter experts, notwithstanding I'm sure there's plenty in the room, love to tell you everything they know about the subject. And really it can take a few sessions with them and say, okay, well, what are the real gems of learning? Do they really need to know all this information? Or what do they really need to do differently? What is the behaviour that you're trying to change? Because what we often find is that when I look at it, research would show, and our experience would show that I would say typically over 70% of money that's spent on training is a complete waste of money. So you have to, and many time people come to and say, we want this training, and I'll say just, no. You don't need it. What you need to think is maybe other ways in which you can get out that information. You can put together your communities of learning. You can start to develop the attitudes and the behaviours that you want to change. But you don't need training to do that, per se, in the traditional form. Because what we often find is that when we're looking at training programmes, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's online or a combination of blended learning, that really, very often, the training that is delivered has very much the wrong focus. It's delivered to the wrong people, and more importantly, it's delivered at the wrong time. There's this whole juxtaposition between compliance-based learning, we have to get them trained, we need that tick box, they have to know this particular policy, versus the whole just-in-time learning. How can we make learning accessible when an individual needs it, in order that we can improve performance? Because anybody who's looking at training or managing a training budget, it shouldn't be about learning for learning's sake. What we're trying to do in the workplace is make better employees, more productive employees. So what do we need to focus on in order that we can improve our bottom line? Because the workplace is typically a place in which to make some money, contribute to the broader good, obviously, as well. But again, let's focus on what we're trying to achieve here. Because what we often find is when people come to us, there's a great wee PowerPoint presentation, just turn that into a little e-learning programme. Sure, go and read that book, and sure, it's easy. People love this training programme. It takes all day to deliver the message. And 7-hour e-learning programme, they'll be delighted to learn this particular topic. We're working with a fairly large insurance agency, big global company. And they came to us, okay, we've got there's this new EU legislation. Now, it's not going to come in force until 2015. But we've been running training courses, and it's 2 days training courses about the new Act. Now, the new Act is going to change before 2015, but it's really important that they need to know it right now. I was thinking to myself, okay, so there's 1,500 employees. They're all going on a 2-day training course, learning about an Act that's going to change, and they're not going to actually need it until 2015. Why are you training them at this point in time? Oh, they just love to learn, which is fabulous, but do they really need to spend 2 days multiplied by 1,500 people to learn something that's going to go out of date? Would it not be better to drip feed the learning between now and 2015, really looking at the behaviours, how they need to take that policy and act differently when they go out to their individual agents? So what we often find is that really, in this good old local term, a pig with lipstick. We have got potentially badly designed training with the wrong focus, delivered to the wrong people, maybe nicely tidied up. Even I would have to say that, when I started the company back 12 years ago, people would come to us, there's this great program, away and go and develop it. And say, we'll take your money. And we'll develop you a 3-hour program. And it's nicely chunked up. We're learning specialists. It's nicely chunked. It's got lots of mnemonics. So that it's memorable in parts, but it's still a 3-hour program. And some of those programs, when I look back at it, I'm trying to weed out, where are the gems of learning? What's the behaviour that I'm trying to change here in this program? But essentially, whilst it's all prettied up, it's lovingly adorned, it's still a pig with lipstick. So what we've, you can tell the former academic I had to get another little, I couldn't bring it down to a 3-letter acronym, but I thought, okay, let's come up with a new acronym for today. So it's not just for today, but some of the key principles that we would adhere to make really effective training and learning, particularly online learning, I would summarize in the learning assault. We're really trying to remove the curse of knowledge. Content is no longer king. Breaking it down. Looking at good learning theory. There's lots of theories out there for learning and training, but looking at the whole notion of accelerated learning. Using multiple sides of the brain. There's lots of lovely research around that, how the different brain synapses will work and how we increase memory recall, committing things to memory. But really looking at how do we accelerate learning, getting rid of the chaff of learning, and focus on the gems. The gems that will change that behaviour, tackle the behaviours, change that attitude potentially, much more difficult, and hopefully change that behaviour in order to make for more productive and happy employees. Storytelling, key element of really good learning and training. Storytelling, digital storytelling, what I would say is probably one of the most interesting and challenging areas of learning design at the minute, how to make really good, effective stories for learning. Get away from all the chaff, reading the policies, text graphics. You can read that on the train. You've got your iPad for that. Let's look at how we use technology for what it's good for. So looking at accelerated learning, again, lots of theory around it, but there's 4 key principles, 4 Ps of accelerated learning. So how do we prepare the learners in order to get the message? In order to be open for change? Different techniques for the presentation of that learning. How do we build in practice and performance acceleration within all our learning programs? So again, we haven't got much time today. We've only got our 10-minute slot. But the key thing I find when we're designing good learning materials is to really shock the learner. This whole notion of sticky messages, sticky learning. What are the 3 takeaways that you want to take out of a program? Whether it's 10 minutes, hopefully not, much more than a half an hour in today's workplace. What are the key things? If you can raise emotions, whether it's shock, it's anger, if I don't do this learning, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm not going to get a promotion if I just don't take this on board and practice what it's telling me. Again, the best way in order to open the mind for learning and get our learners motivated to actually take on the messages. Now, as I say, one of the key things that we're certainly looking at is the whole theory of good digital storytelling. And again, storytelling is a very powerful means of learning. There's some other elements, again, we don't have much time today, but looking at the whole socialization of learning, and particularly when we're looking at the online learning arena, how we can develop our communities of practice and not be frightened about communities of practice. We hear a lot about using online communities, and very often we would go in with very large aspirations, but then suddenly organisations get oh gosh, what if somebody says something about the organisation and they don't like something, and then they suddenly close down. And again, then you have to look at how do we actually open up an organisation to accept that change. It seems very simple. But again, it's trying to broaden out an individual learning intervention into a whole socialisation, so that we have our learning champions, we have coaches, we have interventions, but it's bringing the humans back into the learning, particularly the online learning. In terms of accessibility, and again, it's making learning available at a time and a place that suits. It was interesting, I was just on Silicon Republic this afternoon, and there's a piece of research, now we'd have to just take it on face value for the moment, delivered by O2 and IDC, which says that by 2016, I think it was 57% of Irish workers will be mobile workers. Now, what does that mean for us in the whole learning agenda? Do we need to start looking at how can we bring learning to an individual on whatever device they're operating? Now, within the whole learning field, that has certain challenges. A lot of technology won't work cross-platform, but again, that's a core thing. How do we bring learning? How do we use the different platforms? Because not all learning is suited to smartphone. You can't get a full 3D imaging, simulation, virtual reality piece of learning onto a smartphone per se. So we have to look at different modes and different techniques to get our messages out to our learners on whatever platform they're actually using. In terms of universality, what we would often find is that a lot of learning and a lot of learning budget is spent on the underperformers and the high achievers. So they would be an accelerated leadership program. There's lots of coaching, 360 assessments. It's a lot of time. They're well looked after because we want to accelerate them. Now, it's interesting, there's a piece of research that's just come out from Brandon Hall to look at those in the middle that are achieving. They're kind of satisfactory. They're doing okay. They're bumping along. But research, I say, it's a fairly recent piece of research that's come out to say that if you could increase productivity of the middle achievers, the satisfactory achievers, you can increase the bottom line by 70%. So what do we need to think about? How do we make learning universal so it's learning for all? Again, looking at productivity improvement. And again, there's key things for learners, particularly adult learners in the workplace. It's all about me. How will this learning actually help me? Why will I spend the time to go through an online learning program, maybe 1 to 2 hours, 20 minutes, a half an hour? You need that extra little bit of incentivization. It has to be about me. It has to be relevant. It has to use case studies that I can relate to. It has to talk in the language that I relate to in order that I will take it in and I will apply it. Other things that I think, again, going back to the whole accelerated learning notion, very often individuals get sent on a training program or do an online learning program, and then that's it. There's no feedback. There's little time spent, okay, how are you going to put that learning into practice? What is a proficiency pathway? This whole notion of learning proficiency pathways. What does proficiency look like? And how do we map you along that particular pathway? For you to define your own pathway and then to be managed along that pathway in order to achieve a common model of proficiency. And very often, it's giving individuals time to change. If we're looking at performance improvement, it doesn't happen overnight. We need to get individuals time to practice what they're doing, get feedback, learn from their mistakes, this whole idea of critical learning analysis as part of the learning pathway. Very important if we're to achieve performance improvement. And really, just to sum up, what I would say is the Goldilocks of learning. Not too much that it's overwhelming, not too little that it's just not worth it. So we're looking for exactly the right balance in order that we achieve our production, our productivity goals, and don't get caught napping. Thanks a lot.